Welcome and thanks for joining AGRITECTURE's Travel-Free Digital Conference. My name is Jeffrey Landau and I serve as AGRITECTURE's Director of Business Development. With me today is Aurora Benton from Astrapto, who's going to talk to us a bit about bridging the gap between institutional buyers and local producers today. Welcome, Aurora. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have a reason to be in front of people during this time that we're all sort of stuck at home. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm going to share my screen with you now and just dive right in. Jeffrey, I assume you can see this, but if for some reason you can't, you'll pop back on and let me know. So as you heard in the introduction, my name is Aurora and my company is Astrapto. Astrapto means to illuminate, and my mission is shedding light on social and environmental issues in hospitality, events, and travel. As you can imagine, working with the industries of hospitality, events, and travel, well, this is a tough time, but I'm excited to have a reason to speak about a topic I'm very passionate about. Some of this relates to what I did for my doctorate degree. I'm going to go through the slides that I have today fairly quickly, but I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn or contact me. You see my information here on the slide and throughout. And I'd love to dialogue if you have further questions about the things that I just skimmed the surface on today. So just a touch about me, I've worked in a variety of industries, and as I said, currently I'm working with my company Astrapto, and I started that 3.5 years ago. I also have, for like the last decade, taught and mentored entrepreneurs, mostly social entrepreneurs, and not that I work exclusively with food industry social entrepreneurs, but that just tends to be sort of who gravitates towards me. So I love that work. It's a lot of fun, and I work with a variety of people in that capacity. What's great about this slide is that in every single one of these pictures, I'm working. So I have carved out a life for myself where I get to really do some amazing work, and I have a lot of fun. I experience a lot of joy in what I do. And so I'm hoping I can pass a little bit of that positivity on to you today. So what we're going to talk about today is, I'm assuming that this audience knows why buying local is important. You've probably heard these kinds of topics before. So hopefully I can present a little bit different angle of it. And I'm going to talk about going from buy local 1.0 to 2.0, share a few examples with you, and then give you some suggestions of things that you can do even now. And I say now because it feels like the world is a little bit frozen right now. But at any time, these are things that you could start working on and start thinking about. Including now. So first of all, what do I mean when I talk about going from local 1.0 to 2.0? So 1.0 is something that most organizations are already doing very well. They're procuring from some local farmers, they're using established food producers within their catalog of offerings. And when I talk about organizations, I'm mostly referring to what I'll call institutional buyers. So these are hotels, convention centers, prisons, universities, hospitals, other larger organizations that have some component of food service. We know that farm to table is fairly mainstream, and I would call that maybe local 1.0 because, you know, we've kind of done that and done that well. I think where we have a lot of room to grow, though, in local 1.0 is measuring impact. And I could do a full hour webinar just on that one bullet point. So I won't go deeper, but I think we do need to further explore how we can measure and convey the impact that we're already having with local 1.0, just basic local sourcing. So now when we're talking about local 2.0, we're talking about differentiation. And again, I am normally speaking to hotel staff and owners, event planners, travel buyers, restaurant owners, people like that, right? So if you're coming from other perspectives, put yourself in the shoes of those buyers, right, who you might need to convince at some point to consider your product or service. So one example that I often give is there are lots of elements of hospitality, especially like airports and hotels, where if you walk into any of them, you could be in any city in the country, right? Or the world even. It's the same stuff, the same products that you see over and over again. So what you generally see is everything here on the left, right? Your standard little retail shop or your standard little gift shop inside of an airport. But what we really have an opportunity to do is curate products from the location. And you're starting to see this more and more. I would say just even in the last 3 years of my travel, I see quite a growth in hotels and restaurants and other venues and airports that are starting to really adopt and see the value in this. So the example that I'm showing here on the right side of the screen, those are all products from upstate New York. I spoke at Cornell University a few years ago, and I was doing a presentation on this, and so I happened to do research on upstate New York. All kinds of really amazing food products in that region. And so you could create something that really has a flair and a flavor of the location. And generally speaking, I know this is a little bit difficult conversation to have in a hotel context or a travel context right now, but generally speaking, you could charge a higher margin. You can really differentiate not only with the product, but also in the pricing. There's also these kinds of, not just packaged goods, but really partnering to make even custom goods or things that really enhance the flavor and the feeling of the location. So on the left, nothing wrong with these jam selections. I'm sure they're perfectly wonderful, but I've seen them at just about every hotel cafe I've ever sat in, instead of something that really reflects the location. And again, the picture on the right is actually from upstate New York, based on, there's a lavender farm there, and blueberries are, of course, at a certain time of year, very popular produce. I love this example. I wish I had time to really go into this, but I spoke to the founder of Lather a couple of years ago, and she told me this amazing story. First of all, she told me this great story about how she got into hotels in the first place, and how she really had to learn how to sell to a hotel. And then her partner with Providence Hotels, she, in the Portland area, she partnered with some local food producers to make specialized amenities that brought in those local food products. And I just think this is such a spectacular example of really taking local to a next level. If you really want to go even further with it in terms of your impact, choose social enterprises. And again, I could do a whole session, and I have done whole sessions just on this, on the importance of social hiring and social buying. And so if you're going to buy a brownie, why not buy a brownie that helps employ those who have barriers to employment or other social enterprise initiatives? So a couple of case studies that I want to show from New Orleans. I've worked with the team at the New Orleans Convention Center on food waste reduction. So in that context, I know a good bit about some of the things they're doing and as it relates to food service, and just an amazing team of people at Centerplate there. And here's from a recent event that they did, and you can see the impact that their buying has on local food producers. So this one bakery, as he puts it, 57 families year-round have full-time careers. And my heart breaks for what's happening to them right now, because they don't have that kind of volume coming in from convention business. But we're just going to remain hopeful that this will rebound, and that we will once again be able to provide that kind of support to local producers. Obviously, there's a ripple effect when these sorts of things happen. But I also love this idea that they came up with. This idea is a parish party. And I brought in some local, in the top left corner, you'll see some photos. I just went to a little local market, grabbed a bunch of things off the shelves that were all locally made. And we did a little exercise where we explored, well, what's the story behind these products? Where do they come from within Louisiana? What is the story of the entrepreneur? And they came up with some really creative ways to think of like menus and service options that would feature these products. This is a case study that I'm aware of from Crete in Greece. And this organization, I encourage you to look up what they're doing, local food experts. They, and I can send a link out to the article that I wrote about them when I interviewed them a couple of years ago. They have an amazing story about how they work with local farmers and local hotels to create this sort of symbiotic scenario. And what I really loved, because I see this all the time, and I thought that the way they expressed it and emphasized this fact was so, it was so poignant, that when you're local, if you've lived in a place your whole life, you may not appreciate what's so special and unique about local. You may undersell the value because you may think like, well, it's just blueberries. I mean, what's so special about our blueberries or our grapes or our corn or whatever it is that you grow? And it's not just food and the individual ingredients, but it's the compilation of those things and the culture behind it. When you've spent your whole life in these areas, you may forget how important and special and unique these things are. So sometimes when you're dealing with local products, you have to kind of step out of that and rebrand and remarket yourself with fresh eyes. So if all this is such a great idea, and these are all, really great ideas, why aren't we doing this more? And I think it comes down to a few key things. Organizations are difficult to work with. I've worked with entrepreneurs a long time. I am an entrepreneur. There are a lot of difficulties in working with entrepreneurs, and there are difficulties working with larger companies. And I put them into these 4 categories. First of all, I hear from a lot of institutional buyers that local tends to be priced higher. Yes, in some cases that may be true, but I think that it's sad if we end the conversation there, right? We have to look at this from, again, can we raise prices and have a higher profit margin based on the selling value of those particular products? What about the story we're really telling, the full economic impact, which I don't have time to go into here today, of buying local? There's lots of great studies that show the benefits of that. Plus the fact that local, especially food producers, tend to have a very deep ethos of sustainability, even if they don't have USDA certified organic or any of the other certifications, because those tend to be expensive and rather onerous to achieve. They do have that great ethos, and when you have that relationship, you can go and see personally the cows they raise or the way that they run their businesses. So those costs, you have to have less of a myopic look at what exactly cost means in this case. Capacity is often an issue. So a lot of times small businesses can only run in small batches. They're running out of shared kitchen space or other limited production facilities. And so inventory can be an issue. And so when you're talking about institutional buyers that feed thousands and thousands and thousands of people per day, this can be really challenging. So I think this is why you see farm to table very popular in a restaurant with 70 seats versus in a convention center that has to produce lunch for 5,000 people every day for a week. So capacity can be a challenge. Entrepreneurs are a little chaotic. They're not always as organized and sophisticated. They don't always have the systems in place to really do the kind of those sort of higher level transactions that you might expect when you're working with larger companies. And then there's contracts. So in hospitality, but this is the case with just about any kind of food service, either run by governments, institutions, private corporations, etc. There's usually contracts, and those contracts generally incorporate elements of exclusivity and minimum purchasing thresholds with global aggregate buyers, right, or distributors. There's good and bad to that, right? We have those contracts because they produce economies of scale, but they also provide or create limitations when it comes to adding local products into those catalogs. So there's good and bad, and we have to work on trying to overcome those things. So I think the way you can overcome some of these obstacles that I've presented is for buyers, and I'm not sure how much of this particular audience would be in the buyer position. So if you are a seller or if you're an intermediary, think about how you can help bridge this gap. But buyers need to be willing to think outside the box and not be so quick to throw up some of those typical barriers like cost and contracts. And they need to think strategically, aligning the objectives of an event, of a business, of a brand with what the location offers that could allow for differentiation. But right now, and this is one of those things that right now, if you're a buyer and you're sort of in lockdown and your hotel is mostly empty or your university's all working from home, if you have some bandwidth to share, it's a great time to create a relationship with local entrepreneurs and local producers and mentor them, provide them some support and encouragement. Teach them how to sell to your institution so that when things our economy returns, they'll have better understanding of how to write the right kind of contract, how to put together the right kind of proposal, how to maximize or optimize capacity or grow and scale their capacity. And then also be thinking now about how to measure that impact. If you already buy a lot of local products, now's the time to maybe regroup and have some discussions around how exactly do we measure and convey the impact. If you're an intermediary in this space, that could be a government, a university, there are all different types of intermediaries. One thing that you can do is help connect these two parties. When I go to different cities and I talk about this topic, so a few months ago, I talked about this topic in San Francisco. Coming up, I'm going to be doing a webinar in a few weeks on this topic about Louisville. I've done this for New York and other cities. And what I always look for is finding some kind of directory or food locator, and different cities have, or different states or counties have different kind of directories. Sometimes they're private, sometimes they're run by the government or some other nonprofit. But I would encourage you, if there's not something like this for your area, to put something like this together and reach out to local producers and help them connect with the economic development centers, research centers, incubators, and other support systems that will help them scale and grow so that they can have that capacity and ability to provide their products to the institutional buyers. This is another great example from Michigan. This organization actually went to an event that they certified. They have this service called Taste the Local Difference. And they actually will help institutional buyers connect with farms around the state of Michigan so that they can know what products they can buy and what's in season. And then they will certify events that have a buy local focus. They have like a minimum threshold of how much of the purchasing volume has to come from local purveyors. I love this. I would love to see more of this around the country and around the world. Entrepreneurs, be willing to understand why and how an institutional buyer would buy from you, understand how you can help them differentiate, and help them by giving them the kind of data that would enable them to tell the story of how they're helping you. How many jobs are they creating? What kind of environmental impact are they helping to support? So be a good metrics partner. And then finally, another thing that you can do as an entrepreneur is help them tap into trends. So there's all kinds of really amazing food and beverage trends happening. And a lot of times these institutional buyers are going to be really risk averse and conservative about these kinds of things. But you're the ones that are, driving these trends and starting these businesses. Be willing to educate them and help them understand how they can introduce these elements into their offerings in a way that is going to be safe and legal and accepted by their consumers. And so with that, I went through it super quick. I hope that was helpful. I look forward to some Q&A with Jeffrey here. I'd like to invite you to connect with me. If you I've created a special little landing page for anybody who attends this series of webinars, astrapto.com/travel free. There are some buttons there that you can press to either get a discount on a little online course that I've built around this whole concept, or if you're looking for some business coaching, I'd love to help you get to the next level wherever you're at in your journey. So you can access both of those things on the website. And with that, I will leave that in the background. And if you want to have
perfect,
the video,
perfect. Aurora, I know that was an incredible presentation. I think there's so much that I've learned just through my own experiences trying to do events through AGRITECTURE. And what you touched on, I think is so important, just from bringing people together, outside of the motivation and the driver for the conference and the topic, but also the interaction that people have, not just with each other, but with the food that they are having at an event, I think is just as important as the content itself. And, bringing more local buyers more local producers to these institutions, what do you think these buyers should be asking when they're trying to start these conversations with institutions? What is the first thing an institution is going to want to know about potential product?
Well, I think probably first of all, it's going to be, is it the quality and the flavor and all of that? And they generally, a lot of times those decisions might start with an executive chef or someone on the culinary team who has tasted or tried or seen a product in the local farmers market or some other sort of food fair or something like that. So it generally starts that way. And generally the culinary and farm community within any city, it tends to be a kind of tight-knit small world, right? So there might already be those kinds of relationships. But then going from that to, oh, how do I provide you enough microgreens to handle a 5-day conference with 4,000 people, right? I mean, just think about the amount of food that has to be produced over a 5-day period for a 4,000 person conference. And that's just, that's an average size conference, right? It goes way up or down from there. And so I think it's really about, sometimes it's about the timing of having a chef or F&B director that's willing to be creative and think about like, okay, well, I'm obviously not going to be able to get enough greens from you to make entire salads. But what if we had, what if we were doing a reception and we had a little appetizer that we could, top with your microgreens and then be able to tell your story? What if we had you come in and show some of your little products at a table and interact with our guests while we had this, those kinds of things, just being willing to do that and having those conversations. So I think a lot of times it's about showing up in the places where those initial decisions will happen, but to really get the ongoing business, right? A lot of these things happen as sort of one-offs, and those are all great and beautiful, and I hope they keep happening. But to really move the needle in a community, in the economy, for the small business, there needs to be sort of this ongoing commitment for purchasing. And that's where it starts to get much more challenging, because that's where procurement systems, payment systems, contracts, things like that really can be an obstacle and a challenge. And so I think it's really just having a dialogue. And I'm just going to be quite frank. Sometimes it takes a very long time to get past these things. It may be that, this is where I think intermediaries can come in. So there's a person in Baltimore. Now I'm really wishing that I had put a slide on her in my presentation, Kim Bryden. So she has this Curate company, and if there's a way to provide some links, maybe I can add her website to the links afterwards. But she is working with local food producers in the DC Baltimore area and helping sort of aggregate them on a platform so that she becomes the person that the larger institutional buyer is working with. And then rather than having these little one-off relationships with a whole bunch of small vendors locally, they can sort of funnel that through her. And it makes it easier from just a transactional standpoint, and hopefully from a contractual standpoint. But again, these things take time and dialogue, and you might start with the decision makers and stakeholders. So for example, if a convention center has a contract up with their caterer or university or any institutional buyer, if they have the contract coming up and they're going to be going out with a bidding process and having new caterers come in, they could build into the RFP that they want a threshold of local buying. Now, the good news there is that a lot of convention centers are run by local governments, right? They're a governmental, they may have a third-party operator, but generally the key decision maker and stakeholder there is the government. And if the government is interested, the local government is interested in supporting local entrepreneurs, and you can kind of get into that conversation and convince those people that, hey, the convention center is actually a really pivotal player here. Could you maybe in your next contract with your next time the catering contract comes up, have that negotiation, right? So it takes an ecosystem to change. It's not generally just going to be an entrepreneur having a conversation with a purchasing manager. It's usually larger than that, which is why I think intermediaries can play a very important role.
Touching on the subject of food safety, I imagine all these institutional buyers, food safety is probably one of the top priorities as they are looking at local producers as well as other producers when they're looking to procure food. So for the producer, what kind of food safety certifications should they be aware of, and should they really be focused on obtaining when they're looking to reach out to these types of institutional buyers?
So that's actually a really great question, or a great point, because the food safety is depending on whether you're talking, restaurant or what kind of business you're talking about. Food safety can be very localized, right? Food safety, and when I've talked to small food producers, they've expressed to me how much confusion there is about food safety, because sometimes they're mandated by the state to do something like for example, sell by dates, or any type of thing that they might have to do to comply with local government, like a state level government. But then, wait a minute, how does that seems to contradict with the federal government rules, and in this particular case, the county actually provides it, right? So there's going to be different rules. So I would say the one thing you absolutely want to do is whatever rule, whatever certification and rule applies in your situation, get it and have it, because that definitely will fast track the decision. It gets a little more challenging with things like certified humane, certified organic, et cetera, because those can be very expensive certifications to get. But to the extent that you can get a certification, you can provide a level of comfort for the buyer that their risk is reduced, right? Because a buyer is rarely going to take the time, even with larger producers, they're not going to take the time to necessarily investigate the food safety practices of all their vendors. They don't have time for that. Nobody has the bandwidth for that. That's not anybody's job, right? But they're going to choose. They're not certainly going to be looking that you've already checked that box, right? And so I would say whatever is and I think that's a very contextual thing. So each person would need to look into their local laws. That's where, again, economic development centers come into play. Small business centers, incubators that are food focused, because generally a food focused or food incubator is going to they're going to bring in experts. They're going to already know what those local laws are and help you kind of navigate all that really crazy legislation and everything as it relates to food, because there's no one size fits all to that. But if you're trying to get on the road, or if you're trying to get on the radar of a buyer, you need to have all that. Just put their mind at ease right up front. Like, we don't even have to go there because we've been inspected, or we work out of this kitchen that's been inspected or has these licenses, and so forth.
Got it. I think then, a closing question I would like to ask is, what are some key lessons learned, given your experience in the field and in the industry, what are some key lessons learned that you would want to share with the local producer and the institutional buyer?
So I think going back to something that I pointed out about the case study from Lather, when I first talked to Emily, is the name of the person who founded Lather, lovely person, and I had this great conversation with her about how she got started in hospitality. She had this small amenities company. She made basically products because she had allergies to scents and fragrances and such. And so she had these sensitivities. So she started making these products, and the wife of a hotel owner loved them. And that led to, let's have you supply the amenities for our 2,000 room hotel properties. And to go from, I have a small little boutique shop in LA, to providing, small bottle amenities to, thousands per day, that's a big jump. It's kind of like hitting the lottery for an entrepreneur. It's like everybody's dream, right? That you get that big customer. She had to learn so much just about the language to speak when trying to talk to hoteliers, to talk to them about what she's providing, the capacity, the frequency, the ordering, just all of these things. And so I love that her story included this element of mentorship and partnership, that she happened to have a relationship that was such that she was able to learn as she went along. And it wasn't just like sort of this cold transaction, right? I would say for both sides to be open to that if you're a young entrepreneur and you're starting out with a business, you may not necessarily understand how to present your product to this buyer, right? This is the whale you want to catch. This is the if only, so-and-so would buy my product, right? But and often there's this sort of fallacy that the product stands alone. The product will get you so far, but then it's all the other pieces of how you run your business, right? It's whether you respond to emails. It's, it's really comes down to just some basic business principles. And that's where it can be challenging for food entrepreneurs. I find that a lot of the food entrepreneurs that I work with, their background and their passion and their science is the food, not business. They've never written a business plan. They're not finance and accounting people. They, have some concepts of marketing and branding, but really need a lot of help in evolving those things. And so if you're an entrepreneur, there's a lot of resources out there to help you do that. And it's worth pursuing those, because that will make you look more like you're ready to be able to fulfill a big order. Whereas if you don't look as mature in the way you just, have your basic business operations, it might be very risky. It'll feel very risky for an institutional buyer to trust you. And so I think sometimes it really just comes down to having all your ducks in a row.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot. It's not just, making the sale, but also delivering on the goods.
Yes.
Well, listen, Aurora, I want to thank you again so much for taking the time to speaking with us here at AGRITECTURE, and for everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us today. We know it's
Thank
tough
you.
times, and I think as a closing note, just remember to wash your hands, keep six feet away from people, and try to support local businesses as best you can. And I think on that note, Aurora, thank you so much, and be well.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I really appreciate it. And you stay well as well.
My pleasure.